What we've already alluded to, the fact is, where do we back this information up to? Now, if it's maybe just your smartphone or a home computer, you might back it up to a portable hard drive or a flash drive or something like that. But in a bigger sort of environment where you've got lots of data, you need to have a different strategy, and maybe even for your cell phone, but to be quite honest as well. So here's a situation where they've got an office here, and then what they do is they back it up to another network. Okay, please not on the same computer, for two reasons. A, it takes up space. Secondly, you go and that hard drive crashes, gets stolen, gets damaged. Both your backup and your original data are gone. And there are a number of people who actually go and do that. So what they do is they call it a network access storage. Basically, it's a sort of almost a little tiny network of its own, and they use it to back the information up there. Now, the disadvantage of that, of course, is, let's just say you have a type of fire or some type of disaster or theft, and you lose both the original servers or computers, and that as well, you will lose everything. So that is, so the idea more behind that is that if something happens mechanically to this and they want to quickly reinstall the data, then that's an ideal situation. Okay, so that's a nice situation where you want to say, okay, right, I need to put in a new computer and I quickly need to get my data installed. I can quickly get it from another separate network that's on the premises as well. Okay, but for long-term safety, you basically need to go off-site. Okay, and so off-site can mean something simple like taking it home, although that's not necessarily always the best idea either, but certainly for businesses even out of town, they will sometimes take it, or to another location. There are companies that specialize in that as well, but these days, particularly with cloud storage becoming so prevalent, most people are storing their data to a cloud, which is essentially another computer anyway. It just happens to be based on the internet. So fancy terminology, but that's all that it happens to be. There are obviously concerns in terms of that. Obviously, it depends. The volume of data you might be uploading might be huge. You do have to, not all this, you don't get an infinite amount of free storage available, so you'd have to possibly rent it. There are companies like Amazon, for example. It's actually one of their biggest businesses, is actually storing data. Obviously, potential privacy concerns might be an issue that you want to consider. So those are the things that one would look at. But essentially, the importance of offsite is that you can then restore the data. So the network access storage is quite nice because it's just another network linked to your on the premises probably, so that you could just quickly reinstall. But it doesn't serve the purpose in terms of if you have a disaster and you lose both the backup and the backup server and the original servers. Right, uninterruptible power supplies. Particularly in South Africa, that's become quite an important feature with various types of devices that we have, but let's just focus on the uninterruptible power supply, which in essence is a large-scale battery. Oversimplifying it slightly, but essentially what it does, twofold. One, it protects you from power surges as well, because that's what often happens, particularly when power is restored on grids, or, for example, or lightning strikes, etc. Sometimes there's a surge and that can damage your equipment. Okay, and a lot of people have complained about when they've come out of blackouts or load shedding, that there's suddenly a spike and they've damaged all sorts of devices and appliances as well. Okay, so the idea is that power goes off, UPS picks it up straight away and automatically switches to battery power, much like a laptop would do. So in that sense, similar. Okay, depending on the type that you've got, it will give you an amount of time. Obviously, it depends on your needs as well. So you can buy fairly cheap ones that will give you some. I've got one at home that just allows me to run my modem and a laptop for when my laptop battery runs out for a while, and but obviously you can, for big corporate environments, you might want to have that going along. But the real idea is that you don't have a situation where you suddenly lose power and everything that you were working on is no longer saved. Okay, so it does allow you to continue to work, but possibly the more important thing is that any work that you're not going to suddenly lose. Okay, that's also the advantage of laptops as well that we have, if you have them at school like we have, is that you're not going to, because whatever's in memory at the time, remember, memory is volatile. In other words, if we haven't saved it and the power goes off, you lose the contents. Okay, but if you've got a battery backup, it automatically picks it up and then also smooths power surges as well. That's the other function of it as well. Right, access rights. In a network, the network administrator will assign access rights. In other words, which is really a common sense thing if you think about it. You don't want everybody to have access to every place on the network. Okay, because every place on the network, if they have access to every place on the network, means they have access to any data on the network, which is not what you want. And so typically what you would do is you would divide the groups of users in the school into groups. So you might have and I'm going to use the school example, it would apply to business as well. You would have pupils, you would have teachers, you might have management, you might have governing body, etc., who have different needs, and your network administrator is always the one who has rights to everything, because there has to be somebody that can set those rights up for everything. Okay, an administrative rights means that you've got access to everything, so you don't grant other people administrator rights. In fact, okay, it's a bad thing to do. And in fact, even administrators don't always work on the administrator account, because it simply is, if somebody hacks that, it's very powerful, because they've then got access to the whole network. So within that, you might have access to certain folders. Okay, so if you're a pupil, you might have access to your own folder, you might have access to a shared folder where you can get data files, etc., or copy your test up, that type of thing. And within those folders, you can give people rights. So, for example, if we want to supply the pupils with data files for their test, we can put it in a folder where they only have read rights. In other words, they can read the files, but they can't change the files, so they don't accidentally change the original data files. Okay, but when they copy them to their own to the desktop, which is also a folder, in fact, or to the user folders, they would then have full access, so they can change it, and then there would be another folder that they could then copy it back to, or whatever you want to. In other words, you can choose according to the needs who has the right to open files, read them, write them, create them, and delete them. So sometimes you don't want people to create any additional subfolders, for example. Normally the user has full access to their own particular user folder or directory, but then obviously some of them, if you need to share, you need to allow more people to have access to it. So two things there is, one is the actual restricting of who has access to particular drives and folders, and within that, should you have access, what type of access do you have? Do you have read access? Do you have write access? Etc. Can you create files? Can you delete files? Etc. Okay, then this concept of a firewall, and I think the diagram explains it quite nicely, is the idea of a firewall is that it's software that monitors, that acts as a barrier between your network or your computer. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be a local area network, and the outside world, if we can put it that way. So we put a WAN there, wide area network, could be typically the internet. And so what it does is it monitors what's trying to access on the left-hand side of the wall, if I can put it that way, your computer or your local area network, and what your local area network is trying to access on the outside, and you can restrict that. Okay, purely if, let's say, you want to restrict social networking applications, you can program this firewall or use settings to block certain incoming and outgoing as well. So the idea is that it's a two-way barrier, and that outside people only see the firewall, they don't actually see the individual computers on the other side as well. So that's another source of protection. But you can set up rules to say, right, what what programs can be accessed via the firewall and what can't, and also who can connect from the outside and what can they connect to and what, etc. So those are so they say it's a hardware. Okay, typically it's more software combination than anything else, and most computers come out with a very basic firewall. But obviously in a corporate environment you can get a more complex firewall. So for example, I might need to say I need to let the pupils access the collegiate network or the whatever school network it is from the outside, and then I would allow certain users access for that. Okay, and we can set what we call security rules there.